The A-10 Warthog wasn't built to look pretty, it was built to survive hell. Pilots flew with missing wings, the gun was so powerful it slowed the plane down, and enemy tanks feared the sound before they saw it. These are 20 weird facts about the A-10 Warthog, and the bonus. Let's just say the Air Force tried to kill it 5 times and failed. Lock and load, this beast doesn't quit. Built around a gun. The A-10 Warthog wasn't designed like normal planes where you add weapons later. Engineers literally built the entire airplane around one massive gun called the GAU-8 Avenger. The gun came first and the plane came second as a way to fly it. The gun is so incredibly huge that it takes up almost the entire front section of the plane's body. It weighs 4,000 pounds by itself, which is heavier than a small car. The gun is 19 feet long, which is longer than most pickup trucks you see on the road. When engineers first saw the plans, they thought it was completely crazy and impossible, but the designer, Pierre Sprey, insisted that destroying tanks required this monster gun. The entire plane exists just to carry this weapon into battle and bring the pilot home safely afterward. The gun shoots 65 rounds per second. The GAU-8 Avenger gun fires 3,900 rounds every single minute when the trigger is pulled. That means 65 bullets fly out every second in a deadly stream of metal. Each bullet is 30 millimeters wide, which is bigger than a soda can. The bullets are made of depleted uranium, which is extremely dense and heavy. They can punch straight through tank armor like a hot knife through butter. When the gun fires, it sounds like a deep brrrt that echoes across the battlefield for miles. Soldiers on the ground call it the sound of freedom because they know help has arrived. Enemy tanks hear it and know they're about to die. The sound arrives before the bullets because the plane flies so fast. By the time you hear the brrrt, the A-10 has already destroyed its target and is turning around. Firing the gun slows the plane down. When the pilot fires the massive gun, the recoil is so powerful it actually slows the entire plane down in mid-air. The force pushing backward is stronger than one of the plane's 2 engines pushing forward. Engineers had to design the plane to handle this incredible backward push without stalling and falling from the sky. If the pilot holds the trigger too long, the plane could literally slow down enough to stop flying. Pilots are trained to fire in short bursts of 1 or 2 seconds at a time. The gun produces 10,000 pounds of recoil force backward when firing at full speed. That's like having 5 motorcycles pulling the plane backward while it's trying to fly forward. No other plane in the world has this problem because no other plane has a gun this ridiculously powerful and massive. The titanium bathtub. The pilot sits inside a titanium bathtub that weighs 200 pounds and surrounds them completely. This bathtub of armor is 1.5 inches thick in some places to stop bullets and explosions. It protects the pilot from machine gun fire, artillery fragments, and even some missiles hitting the plane. The titanium can stop 23mm shells fired from enemy anti-aircraft guns on the ground. Building this bathtub costs more money than some entire small planes cost to build. The bathtub protects the pilot, the flight controls, and some of the most important equipment. Even if the rest of the plane gets shot to pieces, the pilot inside the bathtub usually survives. Titanium was chosen because it's incredibly strong but lighter than steel armor. Without this bathtub, pilots would die every single mission from ground fire. The A-10 flies low and slow on purpose, so it needs this protection. Designed to fly with one engine. The A-10 has 2 engines mounted high on the back, and it can fly perfectly fine with just one working. Engineers specifically designed it this way because they knew engines would get shot up in combat. The engines are separated far apart so one explosion won't destroy both at the same time. They're mounted above the wings so ground fire has a harder time hitting them from below. One engine gives enough power to fly home even with battle damage. Pilots have returned to base dozens of times with one engine completely destroyed or on fire. The plane keeps flying when other jets would fall from the sky and crash. In the Gulf War, one A-10 flew back to base with one engine completely missing from enemy fire. The pilot landed safely and walked away without a scratch. This redundancy has saved countless pilot lives over 40 years of combat missions around the world. Can fly with half a wing missing. An A-10 once returned to base with half of one wing completely blown off by a missile. The pilot, Captain Kim Campbell, flew over Baghdad, Iraq on April 7, 2003 during the Iraq War. An enemy missile hit the plane and destroyed the hydraulics and half the right wing. She had to fly manually without computer help for over an hour back to base. The plane stayed in the air despite massive damage that would destroy any other aircraft. She landed safely at high speed without hydraulic brakes working properly on the runway. The A-10 was designed to lose parts and keep flying, and this proved it worked. The wings are incredibly strong and attached with multiple backup systems. Engineers designed the plane expecting pieces to get blown off during combat missions. Photos of her damaged plane became famous around the world, showing how tough the Warthog really is. The engines are hidden. The two engines sit high on the back of the plane, tucked above the wings on purpose. This placement hides them from heat-seeking missiles fired from the ground below. Most jets have engines hanging below the wings where missiles can easily see the hot exhaust. The A-10's engines are positioned so the wings and body block the heat signature from below. This makes it much harder for enemy missiles to lock onto the plane and shoot it down. The engines also have special covers that reduce the infrared heat signature even more. They're mounted on pylons that can be quickly removed and replaced in the field. If one engine gets damaged, mechanics can swap in a new one in under an hour at a forward base. This design saved the A-10 from countless missile attacks during combat operations. Enemy soldiers with shoulder-fired missiles have a much harder time hitting an A-10 than other planes. Built by Fairchild Republic. The A-10 was designed and built by Fairchild Republic, a company that specialized in tough military aircraft. The company was based in Farmingdale, New York on Long Island. They won the Air Force competition in 1973 to build a new ground attack plane. The first A-10 flew on May 10, 1972 as a prototype to test the design. Fairchild Republic built 715 A-10s between 1972 and 1984 when production ended. Each plane cost about $18 million back then, which was cheap for a military jet. The company also built the famous P-47 Thunderbolt fighter from World War II. Workers called the A-10 the Warthog because it was ugly but incredibly tough and mean. Fairchild Republic went out of business in 1987, but their Warthog still flies today. The company may be gone, but their ugly masterpiece became a legend that refuses to die or retire. Carries 16,000 pounds of weapons. The A-10 can carry 16,000 pounds of bombs, missiles, and rockets under its wings and body. That's the weight of 2 full-size pickup trucks worth of explosives and ammunition. It has 11 hardpoints where different weapons can be attached depending on the mission. Common weapons include Maverick missiles, laser-guided bombs, cluster bombs, and rocket pods. The plane can carry enough weapons to destroy an entire tank battalion in one mission. Pilots can mix and match weapons based on what targets they expect to hit that day. The wings are incredibly strong to handle all this weight, plus the stress of combat flying. Each hardpoint is designed to break away if damaged, so the plane doesn't crash. Ground crews can load a full weapons package in less than 30 minutes at a forward airbase. This massive weapons capacity makes the A-10 the most heavily armed plane for its size ever built. Top speed is slow on purpose. The A-10's maximum speed is only 420 miles per hour, which is incredibly slow for a military jet. Modern fighter jets fly at 1,500 miles per hour or faster, over 3 times as fast. The A-10 was designed to fly slow, so pilots can actually see targets on the ground clearly. Flying fast makes it impossible to spot hidden tanks, trucks, and soldiers in trees and buildings. The slow speed lets pilots make multiple passes over a battlefield to hit every target. It also gives pilots more time to avoid hitting friendly forces by mistake. The thick, straight wings are designed for low-speed stability, not high-speed performance. Flying slow means the plane can turn tighter and stay over the battlefield longer. Other fast jets zoom past and have to fly far away before turning back. The A-10 can circle above troops like a guardian angel for hours, providing protection and fire support. Nickname comes from the nose. Pilots nicknamed it the Warthog because the front looks like a warthog's face with tusks. The engines stick up like ears, and the gun barrel looks like tusks coming from the mouth. Warthogs are ugly African animals known for being incredibly tough and aggressive despite their appearance. The Air Force officially calls it the Thunderbolt II after the World War II P-47 fighter plane, but every pilot, mechanic, and soldier calls it the Warthog, or just Hog for short. The name stuck because the plane is ugly, mean, and refuses to die, just like the animal. Some pilots paint Warthog teeth on the nose like World War II bomber crews did. The nickname shows the respect and love that everyone has for this ugly but deadly plane. Beauty doesn't win wars, toughness and firepower do, and the Warthog has both in huge amounts. Survived 5 retirement attempts. The Air Force has tried to retire the A-10 5 different times since the 1990s. Each time, Congress voted to keep it flying because soldiers on the ground demanded it. The Air Force wanted to spend money on newer, fancier jets instead of the old Warthog, but troops in combat said the A-10 saved their lives better than any other plane. In 2014, the Air Force tried again to retire all A-10s to save money for the F-35 program. Congress said no and forced them to keep flying it for another decade. Every general who tried to kill the A-10 faced massive backlash from combat veterans. The plane kept proving itself in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria by destroying ISIS targets. In 2023, the Air Force finally admitted the A-10 will fly until at least 2030 or beyond. The Warthog refuses to die because it's too good at its job protecting soldiers. Ammunition drum holds 1,274 rounds. The massive ammunition drum behind the gun holds exactly 1,174 rounds of 30mm bullets. That sounds like a lot, but at 65 rounds per second, it empties in just 18 seconds of continuous firing. Pilots never fire that long because they'd run out of ammo and slow down too much. The drum takes up most of the space in the front half of the plane's body. Each bullet weighs almost a pound, so the full drum weighs over 4,000 pounds total. Loading all those bullets takes ground crews about 30 minutes using special equipment. The drum spins to feed bullets into the gun smoothly without jamming during flight. Spent shell casings are collected back into the drum to keep the plane balanced during firing. If they ejected shells out of the plane, the weight change would throw off the flight controls. The gun and ammo together weigh more than some entire small planes flying today. Flies lower than any jet. The A-10 regularly flies at just 50 feet above the ground during combat. Missions. That's lower than most trees and buildings, skimming just above the battlefield. Flying this low helps the plane hide behind hills and trees from enemy radar and missiles. It also gives pilots the best view of targets hiding under camouflage nets and in buildings. Other fast jets fly at 10,000 feet or higher, where they can't see small targets clearly. The A-10's slow speed and tough design let it fly dangerously low without crashing. Pilots can see enemy soldiers' faces and hand signals from the cockpit at this height. This low altitude flying terrifies enemy forces because the plane appears suddenly without warning. By the time they hear it, the Warthog has already fired and destroyed them. Flying low is incredibly dangerous, but the A-10's armor and redundant systems keep pilots alive. Double tail fins for redundancy. The A-10 has 2 tail fins instead of 1, like most planes, for extra safety. If one tail fin gets blown off by enemy fire, the other one keeps the plane flying straight. The twin tails are mounted away from the engines to protect them from ground fire. They're built extra strong to handle the stress of low-altitude combat flying and tight turns. Each tail is controlled by separate hydraulic systems, so damage to one doesn't affect the other. The design came from lessons learned in Vietnam, where single-tail planes crashed from one hit. Engineers obsessed over redundancy, making sure every critical system had a backup. The twin tails also help the plane stay stable when firing the massive gun. Without 2 tails, the recoil from the gun would spin the plane out of control. This is just one of dozens of redundant systems throughout the plane. Manual backup for everything. If all the hydraulics and electronics fail, the pilot can still fly the A-10 manually with cables and rods. The plane has a mechanical backup flight control system that doesn't need power or hydraulics. Pilots can pull and push the stick with physical force that moves cables connected to the control surfaces. This system is slower and harder to use, but it works when everything else is destroyed. In combat, A-10s have flown home with all hydraulics shot out using just manual controls. The landing gear has a manual manual release that drops the wheels using gravity alone. Even the gun can be fired manually if all the electronics are destroyed in battle. This level of redundancy doesn't exist on modern jets that rely completely on computers and electronics. If an F-16 or F-35 loses power, it falls from the sky like a rock. The A-10 just keeps flying with the pilot fighting the controls all the way home safely. Can operate from dirt roads. The A-10 was designed to take off and land on rough dirt roads and damaged runways. The landing gear is incredibly strong and positioned to handle rough, uneven ground without breaking. The engines sit high enough that they don't suck up dirt, rocks, and debris that would destroy them. In wartime, if regular air bases get bombed, A-10s can operate from highway strips and farm roads. The tires are large and tough, designed for rough landings on unprepared surfaces. This capability means A-10s can deploy close to the front lines at temporary airstrips. Other fancy jets need perfectly smooth runways, or they can't operate at all safely. The A-10 can land on grass, gravel, or even metal planking laid over mud. This flexibility makes it perfect for supporting ground troops anywhere in the world. During the Cold War, NATO planned to operate A-10s from German highways if the Soviets invaded. Fuel tanks are self-sealing. The A-10's fuel tanks are filled with special foam that prevents explosions when hit by bullets. If a bullet or fragment punches through the tank, the foam closes around the hole immediately. This self-sealing technology stops fuel from leaking out and prevents fires from starting inside the tanks. The fuel is also separated into multiple tanks throughout the wings and body. If one tank gets hit and leaks, the others keep feeding fuel to the engines. The tanks are protected by armor and positioned away from the most vulnerable areas. In combat, A-10s have been shot hundreds of times and still made it home safely. One A-10 in Desert Storm took over 100 hits from anti-aircraft guns and kept flying. The fuel system is designed assuming it will be shot and planning for it. This is another example of the redundancy and toughness built into every part of the plane. Longest combat service. The A-10 Thunderbolt II holds the distinction of having been in continuous combat service since 1977, amassing over 45 years of active warfare, a record unmatched by virtually any other attack aircraft in military aviation history. Its combat debut came during the Gulf War in 1991, where A-10s proved their devastating effectiveness by destroying over 1,000 Iraqi tanks, 2,000 military vehicles, and 200 artillery pieces in just 6 weeks of intense combat operations. Pilots would fly low over the desert, sometimes at altitudes below 100 feet, hunting Iraqi armor columns that were fleeing Kuwait. The distinctive sound of the GAU-8 cannon became a nightmare for enemy tank crews who knew that if they heard the brrrt sound, their vehicle was likely already destroyed. Throughout the Balkans wars in the 1990s, A-10s provided critical close air support to NATO troops on the ground, flying dangerous missions in mountainous terrain where Serbian forces were hiding in valleys and forests. The aircraft's ability to fly slow and low made it ideal for identifying targets in the complicated terrain where fast jets struggled to distinguish between enemy forces and civilians. After the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, A-10s deployed to Afghanistan, where they began what would become a 2-decade-long combat deployment, the longest continuous combat operation for any American attack aircraft. In the harsh Afghan mountains, where elevation and thin air create dangerous flying conditions, the A-10's powerful engines and rugged construction allowed it to operate effectively from primitive airfields that other jets couldn't use. From 2003 to 2011, A-10s flew thousands upon thousands of missions in Iraq, protecting American soldiers from insurgent ambushes, roadside bomb attacks, and complex urban warfare scenarios in cities like Fallujah and Ramadi. During the surge in 2007, A-10 pilots flew multiple combat missions per day, sometimes landing only to refuel and rearm before launching again within hours. When ISIS emerged as a major threat in 2014, A-10s returned to Iraq and Syria to destroy terrorist targets, training camps, vehicle convoys, and fortified positions. The plane has accumulated more combat flight hours than almost any other military aircraft in American history. Some estimates suggest over 500,000 combat hours across all A-10s combined. saved by soldiers' testimonies. Every single time, the Air Force has attempted to retire the A-10 fleet to save money or make room for newer aircraft. Soldiers from the Army and Marine Corps testify before Congress with passionate, emotional accounts of how the Warthog saved their lives and the lives of their brothers in arms. These aren't abstract discussions about capabilities or budget numbers. These are infantry troops, often still in uniform, describing specific firefights where A-10s arrived overhead and turned certain death into survival. Army and Marine infantry soldiers consistently state that the A-10 is the only aircraft they completely trust when they're surrounded by enemies, outnumbered, and fighting for their lives in desperate circumstances. Special Forces soldiers, including Green Berets and Rangers who have seen the most intense combat situations, have written detailed letters directly to members of Congress begging them to keep the Warthog flying overhead during their missions. These elite warriors explain that when they're operating deep behind enemy lines with no backup and limited ammunition, the A-10 is the only aircraft they want providing their air support. In Afghanistan, where radio communications and battlefield conditions are chaotic, troops under fire would specifically request A-10s by name. Instead of accepting the faster F-16s or F-18s that might be available, they would literally wait longer for an A-10 to arrive, rather than accept immediate support from other aircraft. The reason for this overwhelming preference is clear. The A-10 can fly slow, typically around 300 miles per hour during combat operations, allowing pilots to visually identify targets and threats in real time. It can stay overhead for hours, typically 2 to 3 hours per sortie, sometimes longer with aerial refueling, constantly circling the battlefield and ready to engage any threat that appears. Most importantly, it can accurately hit targets that are dangerously close to friendly forces, sometimes within 50 meters, without risking friendly fire casualties. Fast jets like the F-16 or F-35, by contrast, streak across the battlefield at 500 to 600 miles per hour, drop their bombs from high altitude to avoid ground fire, and then leave the area quickly without being able to visually confirm that the targets have been destroyed or that friendly forces are truly safe. Bonus fact: the gun needs balancing. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon is mounted slightly off-center, specifically to the left side of the plane's nose, creating an asymmetrical design that is immediately noticeable to anyone who looks at an A-10 head-on. This unusual and unconventional placement exists because the gun is so physically massive, 19 feet long and weighing 4,000 pounds when fully assembled, that it simply doesn't fit straight down the center line of the aircraft fuselage the way weapons are typically mounted on fighter jets. The specific barrel that fires at any given moment is positioned at the 9 o'clock position as the 7-barrel assembly rotates, which places the firing barrel significantly off to the left side of the aircraft's nose. To compensate for this massive weight imbalance, engineers had to mount the entire nose landing gear assembly off-center to the right side of the fuselage, creating a counterbalance that keeps the aircraft properly balanced on the ground and in flight. If you look at an A-10 from directly in front, you'll notice that nothing is centered or symmetrical like you'd see on normal aircraft designs. The gun protrudes from the left, the nose gear sits on the right, and even the cockpit appears slightly off-center when compared to the gun placement. The gun barrel actually extends approximately 2 feet past the nose of the aircraft because the weapon system is so incredibly long that there was no way to fit it entirely inside the fuselage structure. When the GAU-8 fires, it generates enormous quantities of smoke, gas, and combustion byproducts that shoot backward with tremendous force, directly into the path of the aircraft's 2 turbofan engines. Engineers had to design and install special deflectors and shields around the gun to redirect this smoke and gas away from the engine intakes as much as possible. Despite these protective measures, the engines can actually flame out and completely stop running if the pilot fires the gun for too long in a single burst, typically more than 2 to 3 seconds, because the massive volume of gun gas temporarily starves the engines of clean oxygen. Pilots are trained to fire in short, controlled bursts specifically to prevent this dangerous situation from occurring during combat. From surviving with half a wing missing to firing a gun that slows it down, the A-10 Warthog proved that ugly doesn't mean weak. This beast has saved thousands of soldiers' lives and refused to die for over 45 years. If you learned something incredible today about the toughest plane ever built, smash that like button and subscribe for more facts about legendary machines that changed history.